What happens when law, business, and life collide? Each week on Lead Counsel, your host Tom Tona will take a deep dive into topics related to the law, the business of law, and life. There will be insightful discussions with industry insiders, experts, and thought leaders making significant contributions and meaningful differences in their fields of expertise. Tom is the founder and managing attorney at TonaLaw. He has been a practicing attorney since 1994 and the leader of TonaLaw since it opened in 2001. The goal of this podcast is to provide you with free information on law and the business of law, and to give you actionable tools related to each of these areas. Now, here's Tom.
Hey, welcome back to the Lead Counsel Podcast. Your host, Tom Tona. Before we jump into today's topic, I just want to take a minute to thank the sponsors of the podcast. This episode is sponsored by TonaLaw. They're not just another law firm. They're defining what it means to fight for their clients. We get a lot of attorney referrals from across the country. We pay fee participation in all jurisdictions where it's permitted. We focus on integrity, innovation, and relentless advocacy. TonaLaw is proving that the business of law can scale without losing its heart. If you want to see how a modern firm is built for impact and happy client referrals, check out TonaLaw.com. Mention again the Lead Counsel Podcast, and I'm happy to get on the phone with you. This episode is also brought to you by Meet Gabby, the voice AI built for law firms. Gabby answers your phones 24/7, qualifies leads, and books consultations so you never miss another client. Imagine cutting intake time in half or giving every caller a 5-star experience. That's the power of Meet Gabby. Learn more at meetgabby.com. Mention the Lead Counsel Podcast. You can also hit me up, and I'm glad to make an introduction to the owner. I am here with Jonathan Hawkins, Daniel Feiman, Ed Alexander, the gurus of all gurus when it comes to succession planning. Let's talk today. Give me one success story and why it went right. Can you give me solid, each of you? I did a transaction where somebody just like you, Tom, sold for X millions of dollars, and that person was paid in full, and he was 60. Do you have anything like that, concrete wins across the board, each of the three of you? Like, John, you said multiple 8 figures, but really concrete. What does that look like? And somebody who's not at 10 million. Let's say somebody just crossed 4 to 5.
So, I can't talk about that one in any detail. Right. But I can say this. I've had a couple people on my podcast who I did not represent, but they sold their firms. And they were, 7-figure firms, but they were small 7-figure firms. And they had different reasons for selling, but they both wanted to get out. I guess that's one thing. Yeah, the seller wanted to get out. But one thing I know, Ed, we've talked about this, it happens a lot, is many sellers, whether it's because they need the money or it's ego, they think they're going to get a gazillion dollars when they really shouldn't. And then the buyers are scared that they're getting bamboozled and they're going to overpay. And so there's this tension, and you got to have, like Ed mentioned, really motivated people. And so a deal, there's lots of deals that almost happened that never happened. And this, not just law firms, businesses across all industries. There's a lot of false starts and transitions. At the end of the day, I think you've got to have a motivated seller that is not willing to squeeze every little dollar out of the deal. And then you got to have a motivated buyer that might, be willing to take a risk and pay more than they'd like. So that happens for sure. Okay. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but.
Well, it does. I'm looking to figure out, I hear stories on both sides, horror stories, wins, but I just need to hear concrete. Somebody walks in and they're like, again, maybe it's just my experience on this one website. I actually scheduled a call with this website. They're an exchange. That's all I'll say about it. But I'm like, hey, I need to talk to the owner of this exchange because none of these people have valuations. They got numbers that just don't make sense to me. I feel like I'm losing my mind and I'm spending a lot of time with people I just want to see what's going on. And I'm like, so I guess maybe what's missing is that intentional piece, that intentionality that they're really serious about selling versus just kicking tires or finding out what's going on out there in the space.
Well, one thing I would and I'll turn it real quick to Daniel, but I would get with Daniel and I would come up, Tom, with your own methodology on how to value these firms.
Well, we did. Funny
you
enough,
have the methodology, you take their stuff and feed it into your machine, and then you decide whether you want it or not. That's how you should approach it as a buyer.
Okay. That's fair.
Tom, one of your core values is kind candor, right?
Right.
Okay. So let's go back to the question of the hard conversations. Because as Ed alluded to, and Jonathan has been part of this multiple times, there's going to be tense, difficult conversations multiple times over an extended period of time. You've got to be able to approach this, the buyer, the seller, the intermediaries, the professional support teams, etc., on a professional basis. Get the ego out of the way. And go back to that Walt Whitman quote that's probably the best Ted Lasso episode. Be curious, not judgmental.
Right.
So often we get entrenched in what we know is the truth based on our gut. Be a little curious as to why the other side is taking a particular position, why they're saying X. And then once you are open to having a real conversation, the difference between mediation and litigation is huge. Well, same thing here. If you're willing to have candid conversations, I was part of a process with a client we finished up just a couple of months ago where the founder was basically going to close the firm. It wasn't big enough in his mind to sell it. He was going to close the firm. I got introduced to him. We had a conversation. It turned out that one of his two sons was in the firm and had an interest. He never looked to his own son. He didn't think his son was capable. So we had a series of conversations. I worked and coached the son for about 6 months and gradually transitioned responsibility and authority and accountability from the father to the son as part of their succession plan, and worked with the founder to build his transition plan. And gradually, he, over 15 months, gradually went from 12 to 15 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week, to coming in for a monthly board meeting and transition the firm. So it was an internal sale, and they did it on a 10-year installment basis once we figured out what the firm could afford. And oh, by the way, he still has more money than he knows what to do with.
Right. Well, look, my question would be this. Does it always have to be contentious? Like, to me, maybe I'm just naive. I don't know. But if I want to buy and I'm looking to provide somebody with an exit, and I'm not going to do any of the talking, I'm going to give it to my COO, and that guy's the lady's going to do the talking.
Never going to happen, Tom. That's never going to happen.
Okay.
That's just never going to happen.
Tell me what's going to happen, Ed. Tell me what's going to happen.
Yeah. So, look, the bottom line of it is, right, that the firm pays for itself, right? So I love what Daniel said, because he pointed out, and this is the way I approach it. I always start with, help me to understand how you got to this number, right? So that you're making them tell you what they decided, right? And then you can question that process. You can ask questions about that process and hopefully elucidate or at least get them to the point where they say, oh, okay, now I see why this doesn't work, right?
Right.
Step by step along the way. And so ultimately, you have to be the one to do that, Tom, because they're going to be giving their baby to you, not to your people, to you. And so they want to know you. And, when I say that there's acrimony in this process, it's really stress, right? Nobody's yelling at one another or anything like that, but people get stressed and they get angry about being in that stressful state. And sometimes it comes out, sometimes it doesn't. It usually comes out after. I always tell people that there's an SBA rule that you have to be out of the firm in 12 months after the transaction.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So the seller has to not be part of the firm after that. And there's a really good reason for that. But I always tell them it's going to be a lot shorter than 12 months that you'll be done after the sale process.
What's the really good reason?
Because the buyer comes in and they put their stamp on the firm.
No. But why does the SBA mandate that it has to be 12 months or less?
Because the theory is that if the true founder stays around, there's never a handoff to the buyer.
Gotcha. Okay. So they kind of worked it into, we'll lend you money. And the SBA, and again, I was going to ask this question anyway, the SBA does finance a lot of these transactions?
Under $5 million.
Under five.
That's their max. And so beyond that, you've got to go conventional financing. And the problem with conventional financing in law firms is conventional financing wants collateral and law firms are all about goodwill.
Okay. Well, when you say they're all about goodwill, let's talk about that because that's a question I had with Dan. So like PI transaction, 200 files, you want to buy a small plaintiff's firm, there's this goodwill piece, right? how do you attribute that number to a firm that's been in business 20 years? The guy's got walk-in business. How do you attribute that goodwill number? Like, how do you place that value?
So goodwill is a derived number. So at the end of the day, and Daniel can probably talk to this as well, at the end of the day, the firm has a value based on the cash flow that comes out of the firm and the risk factors about that cash flow continuing into the future, right?
Okay.
And so that's firm value. Now we can break that up into a bunch of different things, but we know that there are tangible components to the firm, right? So we know what that would be if we sold it. We can kind of come up with a number. And anything in excess of that, that's the purchase price, that's going to be a combination of the enterprise goodwill and the personal goodwill. Separating that out is really a bit of a conundrum.
And I would imagine that's where a lot of the tension comes from, because somebody who's got a profit they think is X, you do some quick math and it's Y, and Y is 1/3 of X. And then all of a sudden they're like, well, there's also goodwill. But, again, Dan and I were talking, there's no realities. Do you see a 3X multiple on, net profit as a sale number, 3-4X that we're seeing people asking for? Do you ever see that in the law firm space?
Well, it depends on what size you're talking about and what cash flow you're talking about, right? So net income really isn't the cash flow number we would focus on. We would focus on EBITDA, adjusted EBITDA, or in smaller deals, seller's discretionary earnings, right? And so and if you're looking at seller's discretionary earnings, yes, you're well below 3. If you're looking at EBITDA, you're probably between 3 and 4.
Okay. And this is what we were talking about. Dan and I talked about valuation models and how there's 2 or 3 different, I think you said 3 or 4 even different numbers you can kind of put together and then kind of maybe take averages of those numbers to arrive at your final resting spot of what the actual number is you're willing to pay or willing to sell for, right? Do you use the same kind of approach, Ed? You do multiple different valuations based upon what you just said?
Yeah, we primarily use the market data approach, right? So basically we're looking at sold transactions, the data that we talked about before, and we're comparing the firm to those sold transactions and the performance of the firm. Now, having said that, we also back into it. So we'll come up with a number and then we'll assume that the transaction is financed and we'll make sure that it pencils out on the financial side. So we'll look for a debt service coverage ratio. We'll look for an adequate return on the buyer's invested capital and come up with the number based on that.
What's a reasonable number for a buyer to, you're laughing, Dan, right? Because Dan just asked me this question. He's like, so what kind of return would you be looking for? And I was like, well, so I would ask you guys, any of you, what is a realistic ROI for your capital, inclusive of the debt service, right? You have to do the debt service number, but what's a reasonable expectation to be reasonable on the other side? I want the sellers to be reasonable, but I want to be reasonable too.
Well, I'll dive in if nobody else will do it. So
yeah. Go ahead.
So we got to make sure we look at the real cash flows, so sellers' discretionary earnings or EBITDA, and we got to reflect what the true value is to replace the departing owner, right? Because owners often don't pay themselves the correct amount for whatever reason, right? So whatever that fair market value is, that'll give us what our cash flow is. Then we deduct out the debt service. So we look at what's that ratio, and it needs to be somewhere between 1.25 and 2 in that range. And then after that is what's left over for the buyer, the return on investment. And when you look at return on investment, it's just another portfolio. So you were talking about real estate before, right?
Right.
Real estate's lot less risk-free than owning a law firm. Let's put it that way, right?
Right.
So I'm willing to accept a 7% return or a 6% return or something like that out of cash flow out of it, not counting appreciation, right? Whereas when I go to the stock market, I might want 10% or 18%, depending on the stock. So when you look at the risk profile, your risk profile here should be somewhere between 20 on the low end and maybe 30% on the high end. Right?
Okay.
And so that's a risk compensated return on your investment, right?
Okay. So 20 to 30%.
Yeah. So picking up on what Ed just said, 20 to 30%. 20% annual compounded return means you're going to get your money back in 5 years. 33% annual return, it's a 3-year payout.
Right.
Also, what we haven't added to the conversation yet, is this a transactional, financial acquisition, or is this a strategic acquisition? Strategic acquisition is you see truly the goodwill can be leveraged over time and you're going to compound it. A financial or a tactical acquisition is you're buying a book. And when that book is depleted, it's done. So you've got a one-person firm or one lawyer and some support staff. You're buying a book, 12, 18, 24 months, that's expended. You're going to spend X for that. Versus a firm that has a real marketing machine, a real brand name.
Right.
When you leverage, that's a strategic acquisition. That is worth more.
Quick break to thank Meet Gabby, the voice AI that answers your phone, screen leads, and books consults 24/7. They'll even send out retainers if the person on the other end of the phone asks for a retainer. If intake is slowing you down, check out meetgabby.com. This episode is supported by TonaLaw, a modern law firm built on integrity and innovation. Learn how they're changing the game at TonaLaw.com. Attorney referrals accepted from across the country. You'll see what it's like when you send us a case. You'll have some happy clients. So take me down that road, because that's pretty enlightening. So it seems like, I put an ad up on this exchange. I said, I'm looking for a minimum of X on the gross revenue. And like you were saying, like a 20 to 30% profit margin, right? Because that's what I know as healthy in law firms that do what I do on the personal injury side. 20 to 30% should be the net profit. Talk more about the technical aspect, because it seems like what I see most opportunity as right now is that technical acquisition versus strategic, right? I'm not a monster firm that can afford a big ticket, and I'm looking at a smaller type of thing to do it incrementally to start anyway. So break that down in more detail, because I think that's an important distinction, Dan.
Well, again, if this is a tactical decision, I'm buying a book of business. What percentage of that book are you actually going to be able to realize over what period of time with what cost? And when is it completely, when have you gone through all the files? So if you're picking up a firm with 200 files, well, based on your experience, you're going to cull through those, and you got one pod can handle those 200 files. That's going to take you X period of time. All right, so what's the present value of 1 year's cash flow, or the 2 or 3 years it'll take you to go through the whole book? That's maximum value minus what you don't know and all the legacy issues, the non-collectible, et cetera.
Yeah, so in something like that, is there an outright buy versus like what I've seen where it's just a percentage of the cases at, resolution, right? Where because most practices aren't set up like businesses, you're kind of left with, look, before I inherit all of this mishigas, I'm going to do it on you can get 1/3 or 40%, right? As if you originated everything. Do you see where there's an upfront on stuff like that too? Even if it's purely a transactional acquisition?
Well, Jonathan, why don't you jump in here?
Well, I want to step back to the strategic. This is something I've been wanting to sort of throw into the mix on strategic purchase too, Tom. So as you're looking at these things, it's one thing to sort of buy a book that's in your neck of the woods and have your team run it. And so as you're thinking about the price or the cost, you're going to have to pay your people and your operation to monetize whatever you're buying, in addition to what you're paying the seller. And you need to make sure that there's enough margin in there, risk-adjusted margin, that you're comfortable with it. If it's not there, you don't do it. But turning back to strategic, you can grow an existing machine. But when I think of strategic, it's also geographic expansion. Like if you wanted to go into, Pennsylvania or New Jersey or Virginia, wherever, you could go set up your own shop, parachute somebody in, hire an attorney, start a marketing machine, all the costs that goes into it, or you can go buy something that's there. And so you may be willing to pay more for that hire because you'd have to go spend all that money to start that office up otherwise. So in that situation, you may not really even be looking at a huge return. It's more of your buy in the presence of
you're
whatever.
Getting the foothold in the door, like if you want to go MSO, right? Multi-state, like you said. So that makes sense. That to me it falls under that strategic umbrella versus like the local, I just want the book. I kind of like the idea of both, right? Like I want a book of business. I want to expand the book of business, but I also like the idea of that foothold. And that I can see because the startup costs, right? 12 months of salary for a pod, plus the marketing, plus there's a ramp up period for the marketing. So like that's an even longer haul. That makes a lot of sense. That's where I think that's what John Morgan did. He went in state by state And I think he found people that were looking to sell. He would partner up with them to whatever extent they were partnering up. And I'm sure that changed over the years as the main practice got more and more valuable. But when he described it in one of his books, he would pick a spot in Pennsylvania, find a guy who had a couple of hundred files and say, why don't you come in under our umbrella? We'll carry all of the admin costs and all of that stuff, and then do a 50-50 type of thing. But I also know that there was supposedly, he says in his book, there's always a check involved going over to him with the brand, name. So I don't know. I can't speak, up close and personal to his transactions, but that's what I understood his model to be. So, but
to circle back to your sort of initial question, again, I don't think there's a hard and fast rule of what you, Tom, should decide to pay. It really depends on what is your strategy. What are you looking to achieve by X purchase? And every deal you look at, you may have ranges of what you'd be willing to pay for certain types of deals. But I would encourage, work with Daniel or whatever, like you are. On the front end, you come up with your numbers and you just sort of, you're going to play in this range. And anything that's outside that range, you just kick into the curb. You're not even going to waste your time on it because you're going to kick a lot of tires, I think, to find what you're looking for.
And I did, Tom, that I would approach it differently than you're approaching it there. I would not put a net income number on there. I would put a gross revenue number because that's going to affect the price, but it may not affect whether you want the firm or not. Because when you take on the firm, you may have a completely different approach to it. So,
okay.
So that's what I would do. Just an FYI on that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense in terms of getting it to the profitability. That's kind of why I want to buy it, is because I can run it a certain way and do the things I know how to do. So,
well, the other side of it is too, you can set up a mechanism in your office to do like a quick eval, right? So you have your NDA set up, somebody approaches you, send out the NDA, you get it signed, you get back the financial statements, you have somebody in your office just plug them into the spreadsheet that you got, and it's a go, no go decision right away. So,
right. And that's what Dan's working on now, is kind of giving me that tool. He'll show me the plugins. I actually have people that are giving me the financials now. It's maddening, and there's a lot of tire kicking. You talk about kicking tires, John, that I find more people that are jumping onto these things. What could I get, right? Without any, analysis. One person says, I had it evaluated a couple of years ago. I'm like, would you share it? He was like, oh, no, I can't share that with you. I'm like, well, it's kind of a non-starter. How am I negotiating it, if I don't see what the outside evaluation is?
Well, the way I'd say, you're into real estate. So these real estate developers out there, they know their numbers. They know what they can do to improve a piece of property, whether it's just keeping the building and redoing the building or tearing it down and building something new. They know their numbers. And if it falls in the range, if it's below and they know they're getting a great deal, they jump on it immediately. But sometimes they find a seller that says it's worth X and it's inflated, and they say, well, that's what you might get in 5 years. And they said, I'm not doing it. And so I don't think you want to rely on valuations that the sellers are putting out there. You want it needs to run through your method.
Right.
The other thing, Tom, is I think that there's value in having somebody who's working with a broker that's getting a commission, because if you get a qualified broker, they're going to know what's going to sell and what isn't. And the person has committed to paying a fee for that service, right?
Gotcha.
And so if I'm throwing up an advertisement on Biz Buy Sell or Law Practice Exchange or whatever I'm doing, there's no commitment whatsoever at all in that process, right?
Right.
And so, the problem is, it's like, hey, whatever, if I can get $1 million for my $100,000 practice, I'm great.
Right. So you're saying working with a qualified broker is the best bet then?
Well, I think if you encounter somebody who already has a broker, that works better for you because they are committed to the process. They had to get.
And look, that makes a lot of sense what you just said, because everybody I'm talking to is kind of the other one. It's definitely worth this. And I'm like, just, could you explain to me? Well, it's kind of what I want, so, all right. I get it. Okay. So really quick to try to land it and then go, if you guys have some time, do the Q&A stuff we talked about. Give me the biggest aha that you guys have all experienced throughout the years of doing this. And I know that you may have something that sticks out in your head. Like, what was an aha moment in the work that you do, either as a lawyer or a planner, Dan, where, it kind of stuck with you and it's something that you kind of use today as a result of learning it?
I'll go from my perspective. When I realized that the tools that we had created, and this is what literally led to the book, when we put it into that process format, the 5 phases of succession planning, put it in the book format and wrote the book, said, this actually works. Son of a gun. I mean, to me, that was the biggest aha moment. It had evolved. The tools that you have worked with, the other tools that we're going to get to, these come as a result of years of evolving what worked with client situations, what didn't. And once we got the beginning to end, and we were able to apply it to a series of different firms, and every time we came out with a predictable, satisfactory, sustainable outcome, to me, that was the aha that said, with the right tools, the right focus, and the right intent, any law firm can plan an excellent succession.
I love that. That gives me hope. Because I'm just so sick of hearing horror stories, and I definitely don't want to be one. I will feel that I have failed if I do not do this the right way.
I will not let you fail, Tom. As long as you show up to our sessions, I will not let you fail.
Listen, I'm looking for the cash out at this point. I'm ready, man. I'm ready. I'm doing it on both sides, right? I want to scale, but I also want to have that plan ready. Because, at 57, now's the time I have to kind of do both. I have to straddle both parts of that. So, John, what about you? What was your aha moment?
Jonathan jumps in, let me just pick up on that point. This is critical. You want to scale up and you want to plan your succession. Those are not mutually exclusive. I really want you to understand that. Those are 2 sides of the same coin. Part of your succession is your ramp up to X exit.
Yes.
So this is where we bring these pieces together. I'm sorry, Jonathan, I stepped on you.
No, I'd say there's sort of 2 things. The 4 of us, we sort of live in this world. So this is not super unusual to us, but I'd say over 90% of the lawyers out there don't even realize that they could buy or sell a firm, I would say. And so that's one thing that I have to remind myself of as I talk to lawyers. And then the other that I've seen, it's, you would expect these high volume, machine type firms, enterprise firms to be the only ones that are bought and sold. But I'm continually surprised at some of these niche firms that you never would have imagined being able to be sold that are. Successfully.
See, that's awesome to hear. Like, that's what I want to hear, is that people are waking up to this. And listen, why shouldn't a lawyer at 60, 65 retire down to Ed's neck of the woods in sunny Florida with palm trees and play golf every freaking day, and then do real estate on the side or whatever it is, or maybe do a consulting gig alongside of Dan, it's so tragic to me that people, they basically just leave it all out there after building it for all those years. Ed, what's your biggest aha?
I would agree with Jonathan on his first point there, that just the thought in the community, it's just something that's foreign to them, that, hey, wait a second, I can sell my firm, right? Every other business owner, that's what they expect, to sell and buy a business.
I know.
Not lawyers. And the second piece, I've had some really, really good opportunities come my way, right, through this, right? So you see these deals and you see that they're presented both internally and externally. And then the lawyer is hemming and hawing. And I'm like, dude, you should jump on this right now, this second. Yeah. This is one of the best deals you're ever going to get in your life. Yeah. Do it. Yeah. And they don't want to do it. Their risk tolerance is just so low.
It's really bad. Weren't you the one who told me the story about a guy who had the accountant evaluating the practice, and the guy who was going to buy it chickened out, the internal successor, and the accountant's son happened to be a lawyer, and he swooped in and bought the transaction because it was such a good deal.
It happens so many times, Tom. I mean, you name the transaction. That's why early on, you really got to identify that internal person and make sure that they're an actual entrepreneur rather than just, technician lawyer.
Right.
But yeah, bottom line is I've seen so many good deals and just wondered why people weren't really taking advantage of them.
That's crazy to me. That's crazy. Hey, if you ever find anything in Long Island or in New York, let me know, because I am about as risk tolerant as you could ever imagine. So,
well, you should have an interstate firm, Tom. You should expand into Florida. Then you got a reason to come down.
But you'll have to get a partner if you go to Florida. So
I know, but that's one of the reasons, quite honestly, that I'm bringing on this acquisition. Somebody that's got a history of growth by acquisition, right? Because to me, it's super important as a big operational component beyond just the financial piece, that integrating, unless it's just a book of business, right? Book of business, easy. I can just put my pod structure in place and do what I do. It's different if there's going to be a remainder legacy piece that I got to deal with. Like there's somebody now I'm looking at, they've got, upwards of 150 files, but apparently their staff will only work with one person and it ain't me. So, that presents other complications, right? But
just FYI, what not to do in succession planning.
Right. Exactly. All right. Tune in next time. We're going to have Q&A that we got from LinkedIn and email and all of that. I'll be shouting out who sent me the questions, and I'm going to do it round robin, let you guys just rapid fire through it. Some of it we may have already answered, but this is kind of the cool stuff where people have real interest. Some of them are naysayers and say, oh, none of this shit ever works. And then other people just tell me where I signed. So gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Lead Counsel Podcast. Your host, Tom Tona. Go anywhere podcasts are distributed. Follow us. Leave us a 10-star review. Share some episodes with your friends. And thanks for listening. I appreciate it. Thank you. This episode is sponsored by TonaLaw. They're not just another law firm. They're defining what it means to fight for their clients. We get a lot of attorney referrals from across the country. We pay fee participation in all jurisdictions where it's permitted. We focus on integrity, innovation, and relentless advocacy. TonaLaw is proving that the business of law can scale without losing its heart. If you want to see how a modern firm is built for impact and happy client referrals, check out TonaLaw.com. Mention again the Lead Counsel Podcast, and I'm happy to get on the phone with you. This episode is also brought to you by Meet Gabby, the voice AI built for law firms. Gabby answers your phones 24/7, qualifies leads, and books consultations so you never miss another client. Imagine cutting intake time in half while giving every caller a 5-star experience. That's the power of Meet Gabby. Learn more at meetgabby.com. Mention the Lead Counsel Podcast. You can also hit me up, and I'm glad to make an introduction to the owner.